In our gospel today, Jesus gives a typical Jesus answer in that he doesn't really respond to the question how they want him to, right? They ask for the greatest commandment, and Jesus gives them two. And then he says, the whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments. And the word that he chooses is a word that implies almost like hanging, as if all of the other laws or rules like hang upon, like a hanger, these two commandments, to love God and to love our neighbor. These are the sine qua non. You cannot miss these two commandments, and everything else falls apart without them. I think that one of the reasons why this is that both of these commandments to love God and to love others mean that I must give up my own self-love. Right? That to love God means that I have to make sacrifices of what I might want at certain points. And to love others certainly means, right, that I will put myself in uncomfortable situations. I will have to work hard for others and their good, right? That both of these commandments are really, really keenly oriented towards emptying myself of my own self-love. And by this, of course, I don't mean the healthy self-love that each of us ought to have as humans, right? A certain healthy sense of self-esteem and self-worth, and I ought to love myself to a certain degree that's really, really healthy, right, as a good human being. But I think what I'm talking about more is really that disordered self-love that we speak about often in our Christian spiritual tradition, which is really the essence of sin. That any kind of sin is really like a turning in on myself and choosing my way over God's way, or choosing my desires and my needs over the desires and needs of others. So all sin is a certain kind of twisted form of self-love. And so the law, which is meant to heal and restore each of our fallen humanity, the law is a remedy and heals me precisely by turning me back out towards others, by turning me back out to God, turning me back out to others in love. And so the paradox, of course, is what Jesus says elsewhere in this gospel, right? He who loves his life loses it, and he who loses his life for my sake and for the sake of others will find it. But paradoxically, it's when I start living out of love for God and others that I actually get what I wanted in the first place by my own self-love. And it's when I seek my own good and my own benefit and comfort and my own self-love above others that I'm most miserable and most unhappy. Because as a human person, I am made to live my life outward for others. And the more that I can do that and live in love, the more I actually fulfill my very humanity. And the more I actually become who I was made to be by turning outward and loving God and loving others and not myself. That's, of course, the paradox of the Christian life, right? I get most what I want by not living for what I want, right? But for living for others and for living for God. The great psychologist Carl Jung has this really interesting principle I just came across recently, but I think it's very helpful. He talks about how, each of us as humans, we have our own shadow side. We have the parts of our personality that we don't like about ourselves, that we don't want to look at, that we don't want to really form in our own self-estimation. So our shadow side is all those parts of ourselves that we repress and hold at bay. It's all the parts of myself that are really, really me, but that I don't see and that I don't want to acknowledge. And he says that one of the easiest ways to find out what are some of the parts of your own shadow, that is the parts of who you are that you don't look at, is to look at others and to see what annoys you the most about other people. And when other people really, really make you mad, that's your shadow, right? That is actually you projecting onto other people what you hate most about yourself and what you're most unwilling to look at about yourself. And so you say, oh, well, that person's lazy or that person's rude. When in reality, right, maybe it's me. Maybe it's me who's lazy. Maybe it's me who's rude, right? And he says the quickest way to understand my real self is to look at others and to understand what about them I dislike. Because it's actually probably characteristics of myself that I dislike and that I don't want to look at. And I focus precisely on those of others. And so, one of the best forms of self-love is to love others, right? If I love others as myself, I will love myself. Because if I forgive them for their failings, if I show them compassion in their faults, I'm actually doing the same for my own failings and faults too. That it could be just as true, and interestingly so, that we can flip around Christ's saying today, right? You shall love your neighbor as yourself. We can flip it around and say, you shall love yourself only as much as you love your neighbor. That if we actually really treated ourselves how we treat our worst enemy, how happy would we be? And how much would we love ourselves? So this afternoon, let us seek to empty ourselves of all of our false loves, right? All those ways that we actually sabotage our own happiness and our own goodness. And let us seek to live the greatest two commandments, to love our Lord with all our soul, with all our heart, with all our mind, and to love our neighbor as ourselves.